Megavanen, I'm Kenneth, this is the League of Cloaks, and it's time to talk about Star Trek Into Darkness.
You're watching the League of Cloaks,
So I'm not a Trekkie at all. In fact, all I know about Star Trek-related things that happened prior to 2009 is that Patrick Stewart and George Takei were involved, and I only know that because of my deep and abiding love for internet memes. So when I went to see J.J. Abrams' first Star Trek movie 4 years ago, I was only really going because it looked kind of good and there wasn't really anything else on. I was expecting it to be good, but, you know, nothing special. And then right there from the get-go, I'm emotionally involved with this film on a level that I really was not expecting. I mean, that whole opening scene with Chris Hemsworth going all kamikaze on the Romulans while his wife gives birth on an escape capsule? Holy man tears, Batman. It suddenly became clear to me that I was in for a much better movie than I had expected, and I love that. I love when I go to see a movie and it hasn't really been hyped up. I'm not expecting much, but then just out of the blue it is really good. As opposed, because there's so many movies nowadays that are all hyped up, like super big, and then they're just meh. So I was really excited for a Star Trek sequel, and amazingly enough, it managed to do almost the same thing for me that the first one did. I was expecting it to be good, quite good, in fact. And yet somehow again, when I left the theater, I was really taken aback by just how good it actually was. My super brief review, for those of you who have not seen it yet, is that between Khan and Spock, there is more badassness in this movie than I knew a movie could contain. So that said, spoilers incoming. Go watch the damn movie. So the opening scene of Into Darkness manages once again to pack a really solid punch. J.J. Abrams seems to be really good at giving us an opening sequence that is not only entertaining, but also gives us a lot of important information about the movie. The opening scene of the first film serves to establish the main bad guy, and also to give us a little background for why Kirk is the way he is in the future, considering that his dad died and everything. All while being emotional enough to make freaking Dr. Manhattan cry. The opening scene of Into Darkness was a slightly different mixture of chemicals, though it basically served the same purpose. It first gives us this really clever little scenario with this primitive indigenous race being saved from a supervolcano by aliens on a spaceship, aka the Enterprise and her crew. But then, of course, it takes a whole different turn, with Spock falling into the volcano and almost dying before being beamed back onto the Enterprise at the last second. And that scene was cool even without its true purpose, that, of course, being to establish one of the movie's most dynamic elements, the relationship between Kirk and Spock. That relationship dynamic was one of my favorite things, if not my very favorite thing about the first film, and I think I was afraid that they would lose that in this one, but nope. That, my friends, is how a movie is supposed to begin. You give us a scene that's clever, funny, emotional, has sweet visuals, and sets up the film's major theme. That's some quality filmmaking right there, man. The movie takes us on this great character arc for both of the main characters, wherein Kirk is trying to learn to be more logical, more self-sacrificing, and more humble, and Spock is really just trying to learn how to be human. And in the end, they both sort of end up taking on each other's best character traits. I just love how it came down to that one moment near the end where Spock has just outsmarted Khan by arming the torpedoes, and Kirk has just basically saved the Enterprise by going into the radiation chamber to fix the warp core. They meet at the door, and Kirk is all like, "I'm afraid, Spock. How do I not be afraid?" And Spock's like, "I don't know." Don't cry. That conversation is just so beautiful. Kirk congratulates Spock on how he outsmarted Khan, and Spock's like, "Well, that's what you would have done." And then Spock's like, "You didn't have to go in there and sacrifice yourself." And Kirk's like, "Well, that's what you would have done." They learned each other's best qualities, and I love it when characters grow like that. And I have to say, Spock was really the hero of this film for me. I've loved Zachary Quinto since he played Sylar in Heroes. Even when the show went to shit, he still played his role to perfection. But I swear his acting gets better with every film I see him in. And in this film, Spock was kind of the perfect character. He was this perfect combination of solid writing and solid acting. And man, when it came to the end of that conversation, when Kirk died and Spock was all like, "Khan!" I felt like he pulled that off really well. And suddenly I was like, wow, this guy might actually have the fury to match Khan's. And I was really taken aback by how well Zachary Quinto was able to pull that off, because Khan has all of these natural qualities that make him look and feel intimidating. He's got that deep, resonant voice, the British accent, the tone, and the delivery that just make him feel powerful. Spock doesn't have any of that, but he just has this impeccable way of morphing into a total badass on the spur of the moment. But of course that brings me to arguably the star of this movie, Benedict motherfucking Cumberbatch. Cumberbatch won me over with Sherlock, but dude, he was born to be a villain. Everything is perfect for that. His voice, his timing, his delivery, the writing for his character, all of that just kind of was thrown together into a blender and came out as one of the best, supervillain smoothies I've ever tasted. That was a weird metaphor. Now that I think of it, I feel like that's actually one way in which this film improved upon its predecessor. The first Star Trek movie didn't have that great of a villain. I felt like, the villain wasn't bad necessarily, although his delivery was a little cheesy in places, but he really was just kind of a prop villain, I felt like. He wasn't particularly menacing, but Khan... damn! This coming from a totally straight, male human being, I think I might be turning into a bit of a cumberbabe. And any actual ladies going to see this film, I highly recommend you be on birth control, because I'm pretty sure he could impregnate you with just his voice. Man, there were just so many great scenes in this film. I'm not sure I could nail down my favorite part. Actually, come to think of it, it would have to be that throwdown between Spock and Khan there at the end. Man, just from Spock doing the Vulcan nerve pinch to Khan trying to crush his skull and Spock doing the freaking mind meld so that Khan eventually had to stop because he couldn't withstand the pain he was now inflicting on himself. And then there at the end of that scene where Spock just turned into a freaking ninja and broke Khan's arm over his shoulder and then spun him up and slammed him down like a sack of potatoes. I almost wet myself from the sheer badassness. I really don't know what else to say about this movie. I loved it, and I couldn't find anything really significant that was bad about it. I have heard a couple of major complaints from other people, so let's talk about those real quick. A lot of people are saying that even though they did enjoy the movie, there were just a few things that didn't quite make sense. And while I do agree that movies on the whole need to prioritize the making of sense a little bit more, I think the problem is also with the audience. A lot of people complain oh, this is stupid. Why didn't they just do that one thing instead of the other thing? Then everything would have worked out. Yeah, that might be true, but these films are about people. And real people don't necessarily make the perfect, most logical decision on the spur of the moment. And if they did, you would cease to connect with them. They would feel inhuman. Furthermore, I think that people should realize that no matter how perfectly logical a movie is, there is always some way that you can look at it that will make it seem illogical. So maybe instead of trying to find ways to think of it as stupid, try just looking for the logic that is there and analyzing it at face value. I swear, it's like some people go to the movies just so they can find something to complain about. The second complaint I hear a lot is that the tone and pacing of these J.J. Abrams films is not consistent with that of the earlier material. They say the earlier stuff was more slow and more of a reflection on society or something like that. I honestly can't say anything myself about whether this is true or not, because as I've said, I'm not familiar with any of the older material. What I can say is this, though. Why would you complain that one Star Trek film is not the same as another Star Trek film? The other Star Trek movies have already been done. Those things already exist. Why would you try and do something exactly like them? If you're going to reboot something, it needs to be its own beast. It needs to be fresh. You can't just rehash the same damn thing over and over again. Now, I do understand that there are a lot of die-hard old-school Trekkies out there, and that these things are very personal to them. So for me, the logical thing to do is analyze the situation with my own personal equivalent, that of course being Lord of the Rings. What if someone were to reboot that? Yeah, I can see how if someone were to reboot Lord of the Rings and make it totally different, my natural instinct would be to get pissed off. I mean, hell, a lot of the things that Peter Jackson did with his movies that were different from Tolkien's books pissed me off. And ultimately, Tolkien does tell the story much more solidly than Peter Jackson, but those books are still there. I can go back and enjoy them at any time, and there's no reason for me to be pissed off that a slightly different version of The Lord of the Rings coexists with the original, especially when that version is actually really good. In this situation, I have rationalized myself into a place where I have to recognize that my natural anger instinct is irrational, and I think I've done away with it pretty well. It pays, I think, to be open-minded enough to recognize when something new is good in its own right, and therefore is also self-justifying. Obviously, the true test of a movie is whether or not we still like it as much in a year when its weaknesses have become more glaring. But the first movie has held up fine for the past 4 years, and I have every reason to believe that this one will do just as well, if not better. And I hope this film does really well in the box office. I wish there was a way that it could do as good as Iron Man 3. I know it won't, but I wish it would, because Iron Man 3 was good, but Star Trek was just a superior film. So that's all I have for this week. Feel free to hit up last week's video or hook up with me on Facebook or Twitter. Those links are in the description. And if you like what you've seen here, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I generally make videos every week or so, except when I randomly disappear for 3 or 4 months. Also, if you want, you can share my videos with your friends or whatever. No pressure.
Give me attention!
So yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Victory.